Welcome to ORGL 6301, Principles of Ethical Leadership Group 3's presentation of Ike Countdown to D-Day. Group 3 participants include Channing Cook, Chad Guckert, James Kendall, Kristen Popovich, and Corrine Vela-Speare. Synopsis of Ike Countdown to D-Day. December 1943, General Dwight Ike D. Eisenhower proposes a new and unprecedented role in military ranks, Supreme Commander, to Winston Churchill, which will hold the power to make all decisions for the Allied forces ahead of the most impactful day of World War II. Backed by both Franklin D. Roosevelt and Churchill, Eisenhower is announced as Supreme Commander and strategic preparations begin for Operation Overlord, or more widely known as D-Day, June 6, 1944. Over the course of the next 5 months, Eisenhower, along with his leadership team, which consisted of General Omar Bradley, General Bernard Law Montgomery, Air Marshal Sir Trafford Leigh-Mallory, Air Marshal Alfred W. Tedder, Group Captain Major James Stagg, and Chief of Staff Walter Beadle Smith, crafted a strategic deployment of multiple military branches that together would begin the shift in trajectory for the Allied forces during World War II. In 1944, after General Eisenhower developed his team of commanders and met with all chiefs of staff in order to plan and strategize as well as lay out his expectations, they estimated the expected losses to be upwards to 70%, which weighed heavily on Eisenhower. The loss of humanity was a great burden to bear. However, as the Supreme Commander, he was certain of his responsibility. Eisenhower was a leader that was honest, straightforward, and gathered all the facts available to make the tough decisions he was tasked to make. He had trust in his team of leaders to liberate Europe and restore freedom and democracy through executing their operation. He was realistic of the human cost, however believed that there was no glory in war. He asked for opinions, ideas, and was able to gain the buy-in of even the more challenging leaders such as Montgomery. His straight talk was demonstrated when he met with General de Gaulle in asking for his support. As a leader of great responsibility, Eisenhower ensured that if the operation failed, he would claim responsibility for Operation Overlord and protect Churchill and Roosevelt. He felt he was expendable and they were not. In the end, Eisenhower took the risks necessary to make the final decision to move forward with the operation. Early on, estimates of the fallen were much lower than anticipated at only 20% instead of 70%. Although these statistics were better than predicted, the loss of humanity deeply concerned Eisenhower. He viewed the soldiers as great crusaders, stating, quote, "We may never see their like again." General Eisenhower displayed the shadow of power, and more specifically, he avoided the shadow. In the film, Eisenhower demonstrated referent power. Johnson describes referent power as, quote, "power that rests on the admiration one person has for another. We're more likely to do favors for a supervisor we admire or to buy a product promoted by our favorite sports hero." Eisenhower was respected by the other generals directly under his command, and they displayed personal respect and admiration for him in the film, as well as respect for his legitimate power. This is also evident through Eisenhower's relationship with Churchill in the film. Their interactions were respectful and were a sign of legitimate power each held, but there was also a personal relationship between the two, developed through the referent power Eisenhower possessed. They spoke to one another frankly, and Eisenhower's charisma made their interactions more personal. Eisenhower's referent power is also displayed toward the end of the film when he speaks with the paratroopers. The paratroopers are briefed beforehand that he will only ask where they are trained and what schooling they had. Upon his arrival, he asks the paratroopers not only where they are from, but also wants to know more personal information, such as where they grew up and details about their families. In the end, Eisenhower truly demonstrated how much he cared about the people he was sending to war to die for the nation. These are people first, not just numbers to win the war. Eisenhower avoided the shadow of inequity. Johnson states, This shadow is, quote, supplying unequal benefits of punishments based on favoritism or criteria unrelated to the job. Eisenhower reprimands Major General Miller because his actions were detrimental to the mission. The film makes it known that Major General Miller was Eisenhower's close friend at West Point. When Miller divulges information about the secret planned attack, or what is known as D-Day, in a crowded bar, Eisenhower needs to handle the situation. He meets with Miller, and Miller begs not to be sent back to the United States, which would remove him of power. However, Eisenhower decides that because of the mistake, he must send Major General Miller home. Miller then pleads again not to be sent home because he was part of the inner circle and ultimately should not be punished. Eisenhower was clearly disappointed and reminds Miller that there is no inner circle, only those who live and those who would die. Even though they had a personal relationship, Eisenhower does not allow that relationship to dictate his decisions as a leader. In the end, he does make an effort to demote him only to a colonel, which is a loss of 2 ranks, which shows that Eisenhower was trying to be fair and not display favoritism. General Eisenhower displayed several character elements throughout the film. His strongest elements were courage and wisdom. In this scene, you will see General Eisenhower's display the character element of courage. According to Johnson, courageous leaders, quote, move forward despite the risks and costs. Eisenhower embodies this throughout the film as he weighs the most certain loss of American and Allied soldiers against the lives of American and European civilians threatened by the war. He mentions quite a few times that he doesn't want to lose any American service members. However, the operation must be conducted in order to prevent more deaths. Ultimately, he presses on with the calculated risk, but not without a deep understanding of the cost of freedom. Johnson states that, quote, one common way in which leaders put moral courage into action is by intervening on behalf of others who are being victimized. This is evident in Eisenhower's character as he spends the whole film attempting to aid the French, who had been overrun by the Germans. D-Day operation's purpose was to intervene and assist a group of people, the French, who were being victimized. In addition to courage, Eisenhower displays the character element of wisdom in the film. Johnson states that, quote, wisdom draws on knowledge and experience to promote the common good over both the short term and the long term. This virtue is particularly important to leaders who make decisions that determine the collective fate of their groups and organizations. Eisenhower was in charge of the fate for all of the Allied armies. His wisdom determined how many would live and how many would die. He was, quote, smart, drawing from a broad base of knowledge to engage in complex decision making, which our text states as key pieces in the virtue of wisdom. His knowledge was based on experience. The fact that he was a 4-star general and assigned as supreme commander is evident enough of his intelligence and experience. However, throughout the film, his decision-making skills are highlighted. We see Eisenhower think strategically and ask for suggestions. When he presents the plan, he asks them what they would change, searching for holes and gathering a wider perspective of the situation. He is not quick to make decisions, but instead gathers all the facts before deciding on the date for the attack. He also sought information from other sources, including the officer in charge of tracking the weather. He wanted to ensure the attack was planned at the ideal time and that weather would not be a hindering factor. This shows he has the wisdom to look at the attack from multiple perspectives and anticipate setbacks from multiple sources. Major General Henry Miller demonstrates several shadows of leadership to include shadow of power, shadow of privilege, and shadow of irresponsibility. Major General Miller held more power than he could control, which resulted in his leaking of vital operational information to the public. The loss of rank, and after returning would more than likely lead to embarrassment and continuous drinking to deal with the failure. Through his actions, he demonstrated deceitfulness, coercion, selfishness, cruelty, and disregard. He was a major in the military before the war began and received a theater promotion. While dining with a fellow officer, Miller, known to be a heavy drinker, divulged confidential information regarding the plans for Operation Overlord. Miller was a clear demonstration of the shadow of power. He created a dangerous situation for the American soldiers. Miller used legitimate power, relying on his position as opposed to exercising personal power. Furthermore, Major General Miller was an unethical leader due to his divulging the information to the wrong people. Miller's demonstration of the shadow of power was evident when his friend and fellow officer, Colonel Edgar, pointed out his failure to keep information confidential. Miller's behavior was demonstrated when he responded, quote, "The whole world will know anyways," and confronted his friend by stating, quote, "Remember who you are talking to." Both of these actions are demonstrations of the shadow of power in terms of positional power. Although positional power is more susceptible to being abused, concentrated power is demonstrated through impulsiveness, selfishness, justification of actions, and attack, per our text. These actions were apparent when Miller begged not to be sent home when turned in for his disclosure of secret information. He attempted to use his longtime close friendship with Eisenhower as a bargaining tool. However, Eisenhower held his ground and ensured Miller was held accountable and disciplined for his actions. In the words of Eisenhower, quote, "Power is all about the details and how it impacts those who can't keep it straight." Miller's ideas of power certainly cast shadow on those he worked closely with. Miller was claimed he was part of the, quote, "inner circle," but Eisenhower set him straight by telling him there is no inner circle, there is only the collective team. It was during this action that Miller also displayed the shadow of privilege. Johnson states that, quote, leaders always enjoy greater privileges than followers do." He also states that, quote, "Privilege is a significant ethical burden associated with leadership." In the film, Miller clearly was not able to manage this very well. The fact is, had Major General Miller not been close to Eisenhower, he more than likely would have reached a harsher punishment. General Eisenhower tries to help him by trying to ensure he kept the rank of colonel and that his record did not reflect his actual actions while in theater. Had it reflected an accurate depiction of his actions, his career would have been over. In this case, there was a privilege granted to Major General Miller. The shadow of irresponsibility is also displayed when Major General Miller refrained from controlling his alcohol intake and let himself get out of control. His irresponsibility could have led to the loss of hundreds, if not thousands of lives. Not only did he lack responsibility, but he also lacked control, courtesy, respect, and tact. He showed a complete disregard for the policies and regulations he is set to uphold and showed General Eisenhower he never deserved to hold the rank of Major General. Through his actions, he demonstrated deceitfulness, coercion, selfishness, cruelty, and disregard. In this scene, we see Major General Miller's lack of temperance and lack of integrity and humility. Miller was not proactive, nor did he put things first. His self-centered nature and misguided ideas of leadership led to his losing rank and being sent home. The values he demonstrated, which are an individual's moral compass, were clouded by his drinking and eventually negatively impacted his role in the military by losing rank. Johnson defines temperance as an individual's strength in protecting themselves from excess. Eisenhower was quick to recognize that Major General Miller's negative and impacting behavior and knew that this would probably not be the last time he had trouble with drinking to excess. Miller accepted Eisenhower's decision for discipline and was sent home with a reduced rank. He recognized the need for Miller's support and talent, but yet was not fit to be part of the theater. Integrity and humility was lacking in Miller's actions. He chose not to follow operational security when he knew the rules and regulations. Our text states that, quote, humble leaders acknowledge that there is a power greater than the self. This prevents them from developing an inflated view of their importance while increasing their appreciation for the worth and contribution of others. We see that Miller lacked humility and thought he was greater than the mission. General Omar Bradley was the beacon of light that the Allied forces and General Eisenhower could always rely on to drive away the negative shadows of combat. His leadership approach may have not been the most flexible, as General Bradley was devoted to his troops and would not compromise their trust. General Bradley was an antithetical military leader who was extremely proficient in the levels of war: strategic, national and theater, operational, and tactical. He took a scientific approach rather than an artistic approach. This explains his conviction when challenging the airborne drop zones in Normandy. His operational planning consists of precision and unparalleled attention to detail when calculating critical factors, such as capabilities, requirements, and vulnerabilities. General Bradley does not fall under the category of a leader who casts a dark shadow. His firm style may have been perceived as rigid when assessing change to meet the needs of a leader, General Eisenhower, with disregard to the group's wants and needs. Rather, his approach was a leadership style built on the foundation of integrity, knowledge, and the due diligence of hard work. During a pivotal time in history where ethical challenges were widespread, General Omar Bradley successfully displayed the duties of leadership that inspired the hope for a better tomorrow. General Omar Bradley was a kind and quiet leader, as demonstrated as he quietly departed out of the back when Monty arrived to discuss strategy and tactics with General Eisenhower. He was confident and certain of his plans that were supported with precision, attention to detail, self-controlled as he adhered to his plan. General Bradley was a professional tactician who utilized logic that implemented practical strategy with theory. Calculated and detailed in his design, General Bradley validated his scientific approach by his persistence of not changing the drop zone for the airborne divisions in Normandy. Each aspect of Operation Overlord was assessed and reassessed by General Bradley. He considered the critical factors into the operational planning design, anticipating every potential scenario. His exceptional level of due diligence was developed from the lessons of past experiences. These were the leadership characteristics that earned General Eisenhower's trust as General Bradley ensured the beach was not too sandy for the tank landings on Normandy. Respected by his staff and troops, General Bradley was confident in their ability to accomplish the mission. General Bradley and General Eisenhower had the fortitude and intelligence to utilize General Patton in a strategic and tactfully deceptive way that the other commanders would not have implemented. He demonstrated courage, optimism, integrity, compassion, and professionalism. A leadership style that was authentic and consistent, allowing General Bradley to maintain the unity of command. General Eisenhower trusted General Bradley's professional knowledge and operational thinking. This was critical in the overall success of the joint warfare, as General Eisenhower had to manage different command styles while maintaining economy of force. General Eisenhower established an ethical climate that focused on the goals and means of a multinational coalition. In an uncertain environment, General Eisenhower's diplomatic leadership ability was able to successfully combine various command styles that varied in opinion and personality. He comprehended the relationships between all the elements of power: diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. Throughout the entirety of planning Operation Overlord, the Allied forces worked together towards a common goal of assuring their troops had the best advantage to succeed in their mission. They did not lead with ego, but worked together as one collective group regardless, embodying the true meaning of teamwork. In the final moments of the go no-go decision, General Eisenhower included his leaders in the decision-making process and addressed them as trusted advisors. He also demonstrated low ego and stated, quote, "I command you, but you commend the men that are about to go to battle." And then each leader gave their input on what they believed was the right decision to make. He did not brush their thoughts aside, but carefully weighed each one and made the final go decision not just by himself. Eisenhower was the supreme commander. In the first scene of the film, we see him speaking with Churchill, who tells him the Allies want to make him supreme commander. His legitimate power in this instance makes him arguably the greatest influence on the ethical climate at headquarters. Johnson states that, quote, "legitimate power resides in the position, not the person." Eisenhower behaved ethically with his legitimate power. We also see in one of the first scenes Eisenhower meeting with General Patton after Patton has made some inappropriate racial remarks to the press. He first explains to Patton what he did wrong and then asks for an explanation. After Patton explains, Eisenhower sets Patton straight that his comments were both inappropriate and that he is considering pulling him from the fight. He carefully considered his options as well as the character of Patton before making a decision. By setting Patton straight, he is influencing one of his generals' behavior, who will then go on to influence countless troops. Johnson states that, quote, "leaders need to set forth clear ethical expectation and punish offenders before their isolated misbehaviors become part of the organization's memory and operations." Major General Henry Miller's contribution to the ethical climate is negative or nearly none. He puts his men in danger and ruins the trust of General Eisenhower. He knows what the members of his organization's culture see as right or wrong and decides to do what he wants anyway. His ethical decision-making and behavior was impacted by alcohol, but that is no excuse. His choices put many troops at risk of being slaughtered. As a military member, Major General Miller was part of a climate that could be defined as a mix of law and order and rules climates. He chose to behave in an egotism-based climate he created himself. When he should have been driven by external criteria such as professional codes of conduct, policies, rules, and procedures, he was driven by his own goals and interests that only served his wishes. General Eisenhower and General Bradley's command styles complemented each other, which was the primary reason for their friendship and operational success as commanders. General Bradley was the rock that General Eisenhower relied upon for stability. He was a solid sounding board for General Eisenhower, and Eisenhower knew he could depend on for the voice of reason if need be. Confident and certain of his plan, General Bradley was calculated and thorough in his operational planning. Every aspect of the Operation Overlord was assessed and reassessed, from the design, sequencing, synchronization, deception planning. Opinionated, showed emotion, and not fearful of sharing his ideas, General Bradley would fight for what he felt was right and just. His perseverance in assessments validated the legitimacy of his principles. His military science brought value to the team. General Bradley ensured his troops would be ready and had them practicing with the landing craft due to having so much difficulty maneuvering them. He wanted to ensure a solid landing on the beach. This concludes Group 3's presentation. Please reach out to our team if you have any additional questions, and thank you for viewing.